In today's video, I'd like to talk about when, in a partnership, the abuser is actually the wife. And I would like to focus specifically on the case of Sheree Spencer and Richard Spencer. If this is something that interests you, then please stay tuned to find out more. So the case of Sheree Spencer is a case that challenged many people's assumptions about domestic abuse, coercive control, and who can actually be the perpetrator. For many years, domestic abuse has primarily been viewed through the lens of male perpetrators and female victims. While women are generally disproportionately affected by domestic abuse, this case reminds us that abuse is not defined by gender. Men can also experience profound psychological, emotional, and physical abuse, and their experiences deserve to be believed and understood. So, talking about the case of Richard Spencer and Sheree Spencer particularly, I'd like to give you a brief history about their relationship, and then I will analyze this relationship a little bit further. So Richard Spencer and Sheree Spencer lived in the UK, and they got married in 2009 and later on had 3 daughters together. Outwardly, they appeared as having an ordinary family life. Sheree held a respected position with the UK's HM Prison and Probation Service. Richard also had a very good job. He was earning 6 figures, and they were generally living a very comfortable life together. Behind closed doors, Richard described that he endured approximately 20 years of coercive control, intimidation, emotional abuse, and physical violence from Sheree. According to evidence that was presented in court, Richard experienced repeated assaults, including punching, kicking, scratching, spitting, and being struck with a wine bottle, resulting in permanent injuries. He described curling into the fetal position during these attacks in an attempt to protect himself. But what many trauma specialists would argue was even more damaging was the psychological abuse, and particularly the coercive control that Richard experienced. Coercive control isn't simply about isolated incidents of violence. It is about creating the atmosphere of fear, unpredictability, and domination in which the victim gradually loses confidence, autonomy, and their sense of self. And this is something that we see in narcissistically abusive relationships. Richard reported living with constant criticism, with constant humiliation, with threats and intimidation, and he also feared that if he reported the abuse, Sheree would accuse him of being the perpetrator, a fear that unfortunately prevents many male victims from seeking help. Eventually, because Richard feared that nobody would believe his account, he secretly installed cameras inside their family home. The recordings documented numerous assaults and became crucial evidence in the criminal case that followed. In 2023, Sheree Spencer was convicted of coercive and controlling behaviour, along with multiple counts of bodily harm, and she was sentenced to 4 years in prison. And one aspect of this case that many people have discussed is whether the abusive behaviours displayed are consistent with what is often described as narcissistic abuse. Now, I'm not able to diagnose Sheree, but from my experience, a lot of the reported behaviours in this case are very consistent with what we would expect from someone who is coercive and narcissistically abusive. And these include intimidation and domination, emotional degradation and humiliation, manipulation through fear, controlling another person's behavior, creating an environment where the victim is constantly questioning themselves because they are being gaslit, using threats to silence, and maintaining a public image that differs dramatically from the private behavior that is seen in the relationship. One of the most damaging effects of prolonged coercive control is that the victim starts doubting themselves. Over time, they will lose confidence in their own perceptions. They will apologize for things that are not their fault. They will walk on eggshells to avoid conflict, and they will become increasingly isolated. And all of these things happened to Richard. And if we think about this from a trauma perspective, this is exactly what prolonged coercive control does. The nervous system becomes organized around survival. The victim is no longer making any free choices. They are constantly scanning for danger, anticipating the abuser's next outburst, and attempting to prevent it. And many people, of course, ask, why didn't they just leave? And this question is always a tricky one, because it shows that the individual who asks this question does not actually understand how trauma works. Trauma isn't simply about fear. It is about the gradual erosion of a person's confidence, autonomy, and the belief that escape is not possible. Many victims stay in abusive relationships because they fear retaliation, because they worry about their children, because they have been isolated without any support, or because years of manipulation has convinced them that nobody is going to believe them. Richard himself has spoken about fearing exactly that because he was a man, people would assume that he was the abuser rather than the victim, and especially when Sheree actually threatened this. His story reminds us that abuse can happen in any kind of relationship. What matters is not the gender of the perpetrator or the victim, but the pattern of coercion, of control, of intimidation, and of psychological harm. And as trauma-informed practitioners, we can learn an important lesson from cases like this. Rather than asking why didn't the victim leave, perhaps we should ask, what happened that made leaving feel impossible? That question shifts our focus from blame to understanding the victim. And if we think about any other abusive relationship, it doesn't matter who this is, there have been many reported cases of females being abusive towards their partners, some of them more public than others. This does happen. And it is important to remember, gender is not what matters. It's the pattern of abusive, coercive behavior that we see. So if you find yourself in an abusive relationship, do what Richard did. Install some cameras in your home and record what is being done to you. And then, when you get a chance to escape, go to the police and ask them to help you. Thank you so much for watching and for listening today. It wasn't an easy topic, but it was a very important one. I also personally know men who have been in abusive relationships, and it is so heartbreaking to see that they feel that nobody is going to believe them because they are a man and their partner is a woman. Women can be just as nasty, just as controlling, just as manipulative, and they can lie through their teeth. They can be entitled, they can be extremely dangerous. So just remember this, it is extremely important. That's the end of the video today. Thank you so much for listening and for watching. And please don't forget, if you are in need of support from a narcissistically abusive relationship, if you grew up in a family with a narcissistic parent, then please join my support group, which runs every second Saturday of the month. That's it. Take care, everyone, and I will see you very soon. Bye-bye.